Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, so-called WASPy women are welcoming a report calling for them to be paid compensation over changes to the state pension age. It found those born in the 1950s weren't adequately informed about the reforms made in 1995. An ombudsman has called for Parliament to intervene and act swiftly. Director of the WASPy Group, Debbie Despon, has told LBC they don't have time to lose.
Over 275,000 WASPy women have died in the time that we've been campaigning, and a WASPy woman's dying every 13 minutes. We don't have time for long and complicated, protracted schemes to be put together. We need fair and fast compensation, and we need it quickly.
Well, the government says it will consider the Ombudsman's report and respond to recommendations in due course. The Home Secretary has told LBC Afghans who help British forces will be sent to Rwanda if they've come to the UK illegally. The government confirmed its deportation bill won't return to the Commons until after the 15th of April. The legislation's been delayed until after Easter after peers voted in favour of another series of amendments. James Cleverly is rejecting one of those which would exempt Afghan refugees.
The deterrent is that it's not the UK. Our duty is to get those Afghans out of danger. And Rwanda, as I say, is a perfectly safe country and a very welcoming country.
Police have made new arrests over a murder in North London 40 years ago. Anthony Littler was killed in an apparent random attack after leaving East Finchley Tube Station in 1984. Two men who would have been teenagers at the time are being questioned on suspicion of killing him. The US government is suing Apple, accusing the tech giant of monopolising the smartphone market. It claims it used its control of the iPhone to reduce the appeal of rival products. Apple denies the claims. And more than 500 jobs are at risk following plans by Waitrose to shut a delivery warehouse in North London. The site in Enfield, which is used to pick and deliver online orders for customers, opened in 2020. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed at 145 points at 78.82. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.16.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Patchy rain moving into the south tonight, frequent blustery showers in the northwest and a low of 0. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
A very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. We're streaming this out if you'd like to watch it live on Global Player. And the reason we're doing that is because we have Natalie Bennett joining us in the studio. Now, Natalie has been a regular on LBC for, at least the last 10 years, probably goes back longer than that.
11 or 12, probably, I suspect.
Can we have a microphone up, please? And so I think the first time I met you, you were in this very studio for a Green Party leadership hustings. What year was that?
That was 2012.
So I've known you for at least 12
But I think I probably
years.
Did one or two calls with you before that on London political issues.
Oh, you probably did. And why did you want to be leader of the Green Party? Because it, in a sense, it's a bit of a thankless role, isn't it?
Well, it was a very different role back then to what it was now. The Green Party had something like an eighth of the number of members that it does now. We got almost no media attention whatsoever. We had a handful of councillors. It wasn't my ambition in life. I mean, I joined the Green Party on the 1st of January 2006. It was a New Year's resolution to do something about the state of the world. There was no plan to become leader and end up in the House of Lords. It was simply, I'm going to do something. Within 9 months, I was on the National Executive because Sian Berry, it's all her fault. She's now a London Assembly member, and I'm very hopeful will be the next Green MP in Brighton Pavilion. Sian said to me, there's just this little job that involves writing a few newsletters and a few emails. You could do it. And so I became the first internal communications coordinator in the Green Party. And then 2012, I'd been 5 years editor of The Guardian Weekly. I had this lovely plan. This book might have come out 10 years ago. Planned to take a year off, voluntary redundancy, write a book. And Caroline Lucas rang up and said she wasn't restanding for leader. And I was sort of being lined up to be deputy leader, but I thought, I think I can do a better job than the guy who was being lined up for leader, so I went for it.
And now this book that you've got out now, it's been published this week, Change Everything, How We Can Rethink, Repair and Rebuild Society. Now that promises an awful lot.
Mm-hmm.
Have you delivered on your promises?
Well, I think so. I mean, one of the things that's behind this, Jenny Jones, couple of years ago, said this senior former police officer had come and said, I want to understand green political philosophy. What book should I read? And Jenny asked me, and I thought, I don't think there's a book that I can recommend that covers all of the issues of criminal justice, obviously, that a former police officer will be interested in, the issues of international affairs, all issues of culture, issues of health, all of those things. And so what this does is it really sets out green political philosophy across every area of thinking that you can possibly imagine. I don't think, actually, I'll give you credit, Ian, I don't think you've ever asked me this, but, a current classic journalist question is, we've just discovered that the Green Party has policies on something but the environment. And yes, we have always had, and what this book, if you have this book in your hand, you have no excuse for asking, do you have policies on anything but the environment?
Well, I remember back for the 2010 election, I published a series of books where I got a politician from each party to effectively, not obviously it was before the election, so the manifestos hadn't been published, but I did a Green Party book. So there was a book about Green Party policies. In fact, Rachel Reeves wrote the Labour one even before she was an MP, I seem to remember. But I think you're right. People imagine that the Green Party political party is actually not a political party at all. It's a pressure group. And UKIP always used to be a bit like that, when they were considered to be a one-issue party. And then I think in 2015 they issued some massive manifesto with policies of all sorts of descriptions, most of which were, I don't think Nigel Farage had even read his own manifesto because he thought most of them were barking mad. But obviously, the environment is really where the Green Party's heart is, and it's become an issue that I think even quite sceptical people now recognise it's a mainstream issue in the way that it wasn't, say, 20 or 30 years ago. How has that happened? Is it just because of the climate change issue?
No, I think it's much broader than that. I mean, in what we're seeing is in areas that are related to environment, but very much social issues too. Greens lead and others follow. We're the people with the new ideas. So, for example, a 4-day working week as standard with no loss of pay. That's something that we started saying best part of a decade ago. And it starts off being said, it's those Greens with those way out there ideas. Yet now there's actually scores of British companies that are doing it and are finding that it has really positive impacts on productivity, has really positive impacts on staff retention, has positive impacts on their bottom line as well as the health of their staff. So that's a kind of example of many things, whether it's 20 mile per hour speed limits where people live, work and shop. That used to be a way out radical idea, yet now the City of London and most of London is the same territory.
Yeah, which is mad. Because, I mean, fine, have 20 mile an hour limits. I totally agree around schools and in areas where children are playing. But to have a 20 mile an hour speed limit on a dual carriageway is madness.
Well, we're talking about where people live, work and shop. And so that's not...
The whole of the city of Westminster is a 20 mile an hour limit. You drive from Big Ben through to Tower Hill. And that used to be a dual carriageway side of the road until they introduced the bike lanes. But what is the point of having 2 lanes on one side and 2 lanes on the other, and it's 20 miles an hour? It doesn't actually protect anybody.
One of the first points is that actually you're about a tenth as likely to be killed if a car hits you. And those are kind of places where there are pedestrians wandering all over the place. There's tourists all over the place. Those can be very dangerous places. But also what you do is you get a smoother traffic flow and you actually get less air pollution. And so you get a better quality of life.
It takes an hour now to get from Big Ben to Tower Hill through most of the day. Do you think that's protecting the environment? Because I certainly don't.
Well, I would very, very much question whether it's the 20 mile per hour speed limits, what causes that, or the fact that we still have a big congestion problem in the
introduction of cycle lanes where instead of having 2 lanes, they've now put them down to 1.
Well, wherever you had those 2 lanes, then very often what would happen is there'd be a crunch point where 2 lanes would go down to 1. What you want is smooth traffic flow, and there's a lot more to be done to organise that, no doubt.
But I always use this as an example because it's the one that I'm most familiar with. But traffic planners get things catastrophically wrong, don't they?
Well, one of my pet things is that I would love them to see, and I can think of around St Pancras Station, for example, where they have a new design, they've redone a major bit of road. They should put down temporary, bring some cranes in, bring some concrete blocks in, don't lay any concrete, put down some temporary arrangements and see if they work, and leave them for a while before you do anything permanent. I mean, near St Pancras Station, there's a place where they madly thought that they would get pedestrians to cross over 3 sides of a road to get across one road. And of course, all the pedestrians go straight across the road. And it was extremely hazardous. I think they've fixed it now, but it took years. And they must have laid lots of concrete and dug lots of concrete up. And that's not a sensible way to proceed.
What's the standout proposal in your book? What's the one thing, if you were Prime Minister for a day, what's the one thing that you'd like to do?
Well, I mean, it's always difficult to pick out one, but one of the things that might surprise some of your listeners is how much we have different ideas about education. We believe in education that should be for life, not just for exams. So we want to abolish SATs. We, of course, want to abolish baseline tests. We want to bring back coursework into higher levels. We want to abolish Ofsted. We have a...
What? You see... I mean, again, to most people listening to this, these policies are lunatic. You don't want to test kids at all. You don't want to monitor the quality of the schools. This is madness.
Anyone who's a teacher or many parents listening to this now will be, I have no doubt, nodding their head, because what this book is founded on is 12 years of public meetings where I've been talking to people. And what we're talking about
is... the right people if you want to abolish tests.
What we're talking about is a system like Finland, which has the most successful education system in the world, widely admired, where there is a real focus on preparing children for a healthy life. They don't start formal education until age 7. They overtake us by about age 11. They do a lot of outdoor schooling, exposure to the natural world. They're much healthier as a result, and they don't focus on testing at all in primary school, and much less testing at high school. And they have democratic oversight of head teachers who are trusted to get on with providing the education for a community.
That's all we need. What, local councillors telling head teachers what to do?
No, it's having the oversight. There in Finland, head teachers have a very significant power to make choices within their own school. No national curriculum. But, I mean, what we would have instead of a national curriculum is we want to have a series of rights that all children have. They must have the right to know. But, to know about, I was talking about preparation for life, financial education, something that I spend a lot of people in the house. First aid education, education about nutrition and cooking and growing food.
Well, we do that.
Lots of schools don't, because they're focused on teaching to the test. What are we going to get in the SATs? What are we going to get in the GCSEs? And that is creating, I mean, we have a huge mental health crisis in our schools, and that pressure of tests is a significant part of that crisis.
Is it really, though? Because if you don't test kids at various ages, then how do you... OK, you can say you can judge them on the coursework that they do, which you can to an extent. But in the end, there surely has to be a test that each child takes. How do you work out whether they're making enough progress?
Well, of course, each teacher will know far more than any test will tell you. I mean, you think about particularly primary school children. They'll have good days and bad days. They'll be focused one day and not focused the next. And what the schools are forced to do, and I mean, I think of a parent who I was talking to in Sheffield a few years ago. Their child was coming home crying every day because they were so stressed about the SATs test, and that's a huge problem in our society. And we're not getting the results. By starting formal schooling too early, far too many pupils, and with all those tests, get dismissed as failures. And if you're dismissed as a failure at age 5 or 7 or 9 or 11, lots of people never recover from that.
I totally agree with that. And I would take that up to the age of 16, 18 as well, because there are lots of kids who do develop later than others. And they need to be catered for as well. That's not an argument for abolishing tests. That's sure that there's got to be a way of teaching children who aren't necessarily particularly great at tests. And I'm sure most teachers would recognise that just because a child fails at one test, that doesn't mean to say that they should just be dismissed and forgotten. There has to be ways of sort of nurturing them in other ways.
But the problem is with the SATs, there's enormous pressure on schools. I mean, I've been a school governor myself and seen situations where head teachers get dismissed because their SATs results aren't good enough. That's a result of one test on one day. And so teachers there's enormous pressure on them to actually focus on getting the best possible results they can for the SATs. And what happens, I mean, I've seen this as a school governor, practically the whole school, the dinner ladies and everyone is focused on, it's the pupils who are on the cusp between one level of mark and the next. And the whole school is focused on pushing those few kids over the line. And the kids who are not going to get the marks just get abandoned. And the kids who are doing well are like, well, they're okay, so that's fine.
But surely the secret is to not abandon the kids who aren't doing too well, but find a way of making sure that next time they do well, because otherwise what you're doing is penalising success. You're penalising the kids that do well in the SATs at the expense of others. That's surely not right.
But what the current system does, and as I said, I've seen this as a school governor, is the kids are going to do fine, going to get the top levels of marks. You don't keep pushing them further because there's nothing extra to be gained for the school. There's no benefit. Now, this is what the system pushes people to do. There are some head teachers who are confident enough. I was talking to a head teacher recently who was saying, he was in his final job and was about to retire, and he had suddenly this wonderful confidence that he had nothing to lose anymore, and so he could really do great things for his kids. But you take, say, a new head teacher who's just starting out in their career, thinks they're going to be doing this for 10 or 20 years. There's huge pressure on them to get the SATs results, to get the results. That's what they're judged by.
I would still argue that if you look at schools in London, which in the 70s and 80s were virtually every school was a basket case. Most of the parents in the catchment areas didn't want their kids to go to those schools. The standard of schools in London now, and I whenever I talk about London, I'm aware that we've got listeners all over the country, but it is, I think, a common belief that schools and education in London have improved massively over the last 20 years. And that is because head teachers have been almost instructed, I suppose, to strive for excellence. And that's got to be what surely every school has got to do.
Well, but what's been defined as excellence is a huge problem. I mean, we had a debate in the House of Lords, which I actually secured, looking at the issue of mental health in schools, and some of these schools with extremely strict discipline, and pupils have to walk down the corridor with their hands by their sides, and they're not allowed to speak, and they get a detention if they haven't got 4 colours of pen in their pocket, etc., etc. We've seen this push towards rigidity. It's a really Victorian idea of what schools are supposed to look like. And I mean, it's interesting that in that debate, Ed Vaizey and I, who a Tory peer, former minister, were agreeing that we've got a structure of schools that's very Victorian. And that's one of the main theses of this book, is that we're making lots of technical improvements these days. We've come on enormously with the technology that many people are listening to us on now. But we haven't really changed so many social structures, whether it's schools, whether it's the structure of our working day. We've had a 40-hour working week as standard for a very long time. Let's see how we can actually make social innovation to create a better life and live within our environmental limits.
Harry says, why do you get an expert on in their field and then disagree with everything they say? Well, the point of doing an hour like this is to have a disagreement. And if I agree with certain, I have agreed with one or two things that Natalie said, but I think the best way of having a debate is to openly disagree, and I think we've done that over the years, and I think we rub along quite well, don't we?
I think we do. I always enjoy coming on your shows, Ian.
Good.
Definitely.
Well, we'll talk about environmental things in a moment, and then we'll come to your calls. We've got lots of texts coming in. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to give us a call and ask Natalie a question. Her book is called very lurid green colour. If you're watching on Global Player, what kind of green would you call that?
I call it neon green. You won't miss it in a bookshop.
You absolutely wouldn't, and I suppose that's the secret, isn't it? Make people pick it up off a bookshop table. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
past 8 on LBC. We have Natalie Bennett with us, former leader of the Green Party. She's got this new book out this week, Change Everything, How We Can Rethink, Repair and Rebuild Society. We're talking about several of the themes in the book. We're not going to manage to cover everything, though, in this hour, because I do want to get to your calls. But, I mean, she's divided it up into sections. Active freedom. What comes under that section then? Education...
and politics.
Decommodifying time. What does
that's
that mean,
universal
mean?
Basic income, which we've already...
Well, I'm glad you come on to that, because David has texted, this is not a question. Just tell Natalie that I listened to her All Talk podcast with you yesterday and I joined the Greens on the back of it.
Well, welcome. That's absolutely great. And anyone who wants to follow you, it's really easy online.
It's unusual that I do a podcast with someone and then do an hour with them on the radio. But we did, I don't know how long we did, about an hour on the All Talk podcast, which is available now. Just go to Global Player and download it after the show, obviously. And we did talk about universal basic income there at length. So I'm not going to go into that now particularly. But you've got also true prosperity, which includes restoring the earth, the people's economy, controlling the money, healthy life, enabling well-being, unleashing culture, recovering space. What does that mean? That
means how much privatisation we've seen across the UK. I mean, there's the absolutely astonishing statistic that 10% of the entire UK land area that used to be in public hands since the election of Margaret Thatcher has been sold into private hands. What was publicly owned land, 50% of it has gone private. And I think many of us know this. Is that
necessarily a bad thing?
Well, if you think about, some of the shopping centres that used to be public space, that used to be public roads where you could set up a political stall, where there were benches where people could just sit and wait. And we've seen the privatisation of those kind of spaces where there's not places for people to gather, where security guards come and often chase off young people who might just be standing on the street corner having a chat. The closure of pubs in so many places that it's somewhere where people could have met. The closures of libraries and community centres. Just down the road from here, there's a famous hall just outside Westminster that was where lots of the big historical events of the 19th and earliest 20th century happened. It's now a private flats and private offices. So many of those public spaces have been sold off and are not available for people to gather anymore. And we talk a lot about loneliness and the lack of community, but we've just lost so many of those kind of spaces.
And the final section, shared resilience, repairing the broken, rebalancing the world, making reparation. Let's concentrate for a moment on the main raison d'etre of the Green Party and the environmental movement at the moment, and that is combating climate change. Now, you've got far more radical solutions to this than the other political parties. But do you feel that the British public are ready for some of the solutions that you're proposing?
I think very much so. And I'm going to question the climate change as the be-all and end-all. What I would say is that we have physical limits on this planet, and the Stockholm Institute has identified 9 planetary boundaries. And last year there was peer-reviewed research out showing 6 of those planetary boundaries have been exceeded. So climate, of course, and the destruction of nature. But one that lots of people are really concerned about is plastics. We've turned our oceans into a plastic soup. And that's part of a much broader issue that I think people are really starting to cotton on to in terms of the collapse in insect populations, which is related to pesticides. I do a lot of work on antimicrobial resistance, the impact of pharmaceuticals on our natural environment, on our own health. So we've got all of these planetary boundaries. We've got to operate within them. And, I would say the foundational thing that the Green Party says, if you want to sum it up in one sentence, is that there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life, for us to look after nature and climate, if we share those resources out fairly. And that's where the Green Party comes from.
I wasn't going to bring in callers until after the news, but I see that I've actually asked... I've stolen Matt in Solihull's thunder with the question that I just asked you. So I want to get him on air anyway. Matt, I apologise for stealing some of your thunder there, but what would you like to say to Natalie?
Ian, we're old friends, so I'll let you off the hook.
Thank goodness for that.
Natalie, the Green Party for me has always been my rather reluctant protest vote, especially in the Corbyn years, and I've always felt guilty about it because I do love your policies, and I'm about to become a new father, so when you were talking about your education policy, that really resonated with me, and there is quantifiable evidence about that Scandinavian model. But do you think the British electorate especially in 2024, is ready for the kind of policies that you're promoting. Because I think I am, but I think if I put my tick next to the Green Party in October or whenever it is, it won't make a difference.
Well, the fact is that around the country, and indeed in Solihull, we've got a very large number of councillors, and the election we know that's going to happen will be the council elections coming up on May 2. And if you look at the graph over the last 4 or 5 years, the number of Green councillors literally goes up on an exponential line. We're up to, I think, I can't keep up with this number, but something like 760 councillors around the country. We just elected last year the first Green majority council on Mid Suffolk District Council. There's 36 councils around the country where Greens are some part of a coalition. We, of course, have got 2 Green ministers in the Scottish government. So we're really seeing an explosion in the Green vote, and that is increasingly being converted into people who are being elected. And in the next general election, whenever that is, I'm confident we're going to elect the next generation of Green MPs. And something to know that even if we're not looking terribly strong in your local area, every Green vote means that we get more of what's known as short money. So that's money to support the work of Green MPs in Parliament. And it also, of course, has a big impact on the kind of media coverage we get. So, voting for the second worst candidate in the hope of stopping what you think is the worst candidate has given us the kind of politics we've had, a really failed politics. Voting for what you believe in and getting it can be the future.
See, I totally agree with you on that. We've found common cause at last, because this whole idea that people should cast negative votes is, I think, really wrong. And if you believe in something, vote for it. You may not win the election, but you might win the one after next, because if you can persuade people of your views. And it's the same for all political parties. I mean, I've said before, I've got the dilemma now that if I don't vote for the party that I would normally vote for, where do I go? Do I cast a negative vote? Because I've just argued that you shouldn't. But in a sense, I think that a lot of people are searching for a political home, and if they can't find one, they then register a protest vote. And I think actually the Green Party is going to get a lot of those at the next election.
Well, we're happy to take them, but what I would also say is if you believe in what we're saying, it's a question of there's a political term, the Overton Window, of what's regarded as mainstream politics, and every Green vote helps shift that Overton window in the direction of Green political ideas. And as I said, Greens lead and others follow. There's so many things that we were campaigning for that 10 years ago. I mean, we were talking about air pollution as a serious public health issue 10 years ago, and then it was like, oh, the Greens are the only people talking about this. Now everyone realises that air pollution is a really serious health issue. In London, people live on average 6 months less because of the air pollution.
And I have to say, whenever we talk about that subject on the programme, you get a full switchboard in 2 minutes. And that says quite a lot. OK, it's anecdotal. But Alison in Lincolnshire says, what a breath of fresh air. Someone talking so much sense. Thank you. You have my vote. Now, there was a really good... Can we scroll the screen up, please? Because my mouse isn't working. This texter says, my brother-in-law is Finnish. Everything Natalie says about schools is absolutely true. My son's education doesn't seem to be anywhere as good as my Finnish family's. In my son's primary school, some of his teachers went to see other educational systems, and they said the Finland one was the best. There's a reason why Finland is the happiest place to live. We talked about that last night. It comes top of the World Happiness Index. Maybe we should do a Finnish hour soon. Maybe that's something that we should look at doing and have a panel. We'll get the Finnish ambassador in and a couple of other experts. I quite like the idea of that. Right, we'll take more of your calls in a moment to Natalie Bennett. We're talking about her book, Change Everything, How We Can Rethink, Repair and Rebuild Society. Are you somebody who's always been a bit sceptical of the Greens, but now you're actually taking them a bit more seriously? Or do you think some of the policies, some which Natalie has articulated in this hour, but others just mean that you can't support them because you just think that they're not in the real world, they're unaffordable? 0345 6060 973. It's 8:31 on LBC. Daryl Jackson has the news headlines.
The chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee has told LBC he doesn't expect the government to do anything to help WASPy women. Sir Stephen Timms has been speaking after a report criticised the handling of changes to the state pension age. The Home Secretary has told LBC Afghan refugees who helped the British but arrive in the UK illegally will be sent to Rwanda. James Cleverly's been speaking as the government has confirmed its deportation bill won't return to the Commons until after Easter. And the head of the Bank of England says the prospects for an interest rate cut are now moving in the right direction. But the panel which decides on the base rate has kept it at 5.25%, partly because of strong wage growth. LBC weather, patchy rain moving into the south tonight, frequent blustery showers in the northwest and a low of 0.
LBC.
LBC. Natalie Bennett's book is called Change Everything, How We Can Rethink, Repair and Rebuild Society. It's available in all good and bad bookshops and everywhere you can buy books online, I imagine, too. Now, we're being deluged with loads and loads and loads of texts. I have to say the phone calls are less plentiful, so if you phone now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Let's run through a few of the texts here. Nicola in Kent says, the Green Party has got my vote, of course, because of its environmental credentials, but also because it's the only party which has the courage to say how damaging the ridiculous Brexit was. We'll take it that you agree with that.
And what I would say is, one of the worst things about Brexit is the way in which young people have fewer freedoms and opportunities than their parents had. I feel really sad when I talk to school groups and I say, you won't have the same options your parents had to just take off and travel the continent.
Do we want to get into an argy-bargy about Brexit?
Well, I mean, what I just said, I'm afraid, Ian, is simply unarguable.
School exchanges still take place. I mean, less so than in my day, not because of Brexit, because the rules and regulations and the health and safety stuff is just sort of preventing them. I mean, if I was a teacher, would I want to take a group on the school exchange now? I'm not sure I'd have the courage to.
I'm not talking so much about when they're at school, but when you've left school or you've left college or you've left university, you could just get a £10 cheap coach fare from Victoria, jump on the coach, arrive in Berlin, arrive in Helsinki, arrive in.
You still can.
But you can't stay. You can't.
Well, you can stay up to 90 days.
Yeah, but you meet, a wonderful young man or woman. You'd love to see where this goes. That 90-day figure is there, ticking down day after day after day, and you want to find a job. You can't just find a job anymore. Those were freedoms that that generations were able to enjoy that we've taken away from our young people.
This texter asks, what is your message to groups like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil regarding their tactics?
Well, I mean, we are the Green Party. What we're concerned about is getting people elected, is getting to run the country, run your local council, etc. That's what we absolutely focus on. But I often... You're kind of a presenting exception, Ian, that you have on occasions allowed me to talk about home insulation and home energy efficiency.
Oh, God, here we go.
But, this is a really important issue to people's health.
You are right, I agree.
It's an environmental issue, but it's also a huge issue for people's health. And, we've talked a bit already about the mental health. We also have a terrible level of physical health in our society. The government started to notice it because so many people are not in the workplace anymore because they're ill. But we have a terrible quality of public health in life expectancies, particularly healthy life expectancy, is now starting to go down in many parts of the country. Poor housing is a big part to do with that. And yet it was actually, what helped really get that on the agenda was non-violent direct action. And that's been the case. I've supported anti-fracking protests over the years who I think were proved absolutely right. Sheffield, the tree protesters there, had to put their bodies and their freedom on the line.
That's one that I would have happily taken part in.
There you go, Ian.
The thought that elected representatives could sanction the culling. I mean, I'm going to use the word cull, which is normally only used in terms of animals, and it happened in Plymouth as well. I can't remember which one happened first, but you'd have thought
Plymouth came later. Yeah.
Well, you'd have thought Plymouth might have learned from the experience in Sheffield. I mean, outrageous.
And yet, that was a story that actually went round the world. Yeah. And I happen to know, people often talk about the bad things about social media, but it was actually there's now a street tree group protecting street trees in New Delhi because they saw what people had done in Sheffield. So, you've demonstrated, Ian, that, you think there are some things there are worth taking non-violent direct action for.
I do, but I do question the tactics of some of these groups now, because I think what they're doing is damaging the cause that they purport to believe in. And surely the whole point of trying to win a campaign is to get more people on your side, whereas what I think they've done, Extinction Rebellion, I think, started actually as a very positive thing in the way that they protested, but it's been taken over by, shall we say, some of the usual suspects.
Well, I don't think Extinction Rebellion doesn't actually take street actions or law-breaking actions anymore. I mean, there are other different groups and other organisations.
Right, we've got lots of calls coming in now. Nick is in Helston in Cornwall, which anywhere in Cornwall I automatically think sounds idyllic. Is it, Nick?
It is, Nick. It is absolutely perfect down here. It actually rained every day until yesterday, and it was a beautiful sunny day.
Marvellous. Now, what would you like to say to Natalie?
Well, I've got two questions for Natalie, but I also want to make a comment to you. I heard your comment about the abuse that you're getting. Totally unfounded and absolutely disgusting, and I love listening to you.
Well, you're very kind, Nick. Thank you.
But the two questions for Natalie. One is about nuclear power. I did a PhD in nuclear chemistry, so obviously I'd be a complete hypocrite if I didn't support nuclear power. I'd be interested in what she thinks about that. But also, secondly, which I've only just thought of actually, Just Stop Oil, I think, are terribly naive, because we are going to have to keep getting oil because so many, well, literally just pharmaceuticals are derived from oil. So I'd just like her opinion on both, please.
Okay, well, nuclear power to start off with. I've and the Green Party have long argued against nuclear power, and there are continuing concerns about safety. There's continuing concerns about the ways in which the fuel is mined. It's of course not a renewable energy. It's something you have to mine, considerable damage. There's concerns about cost. But for me, what's the killer argument against new nuclear is to actually build a new nuclear power station now, get it up and running. You're looking at the absolute best, something like 10 or 12 years. We're now in a climate emergency. You can put new solar panels on your roof next week. You can put up a wind turbine in maybe 6 months or 12 months. New nuclear is simply too slow.
But is that really an argument? Because, I mean, had the Blair government taken these decisions, we wouldn't be having this discussion now, because all of these new nuclear reactors would be on stream. Surely a sensible energy policy, yes, has to be geared towards renewable energy. Quite agree with that. And the more, the better. But we can't do without other forms of energy, can we? Because we can't rely just on wind energy or solar energy or wave energy. We're never going to get to I doubt whether we'll get to a point where we can supply 100% from those sources, even though I'd quite like us to be able to. So hasn't nuclear got to form a place in that energy basket?
No. I mean, there is actually peer-reviewed research showing the world can go 100% renewable. And one of the important things that people sort of sometimes struggle to understand is we've already got this and there's going to be more, is interconnectors between other parts of Europe. And so when we've got lots of power, we can export the power to Europe. When they've got lots of power, they can export some of it to us. It's a matter of balancing up the world. And one of the other things to say is that we're used to the idea of energy as something that you just turn the tap on, flick the switch whenever you want to. What we've got to look at is, and what we can look at, and what will save us an enormous amount of money, is looking at the demand side. So, at a really simple kind of level, imagine that you've got an extra plug-in on your freezer and your home freezer gets 20 degrees colder when there's lots of cheap power around. And then when there's less power around, it switches off and just, slightly keeps warming up, but still colder than it needs to be for 2 or 3 days. And so you can have that demand management. I mean, years ago, I went and visited in Cornwall, actually. Nick's not very far from you, the Eden Project. And they were already, and this was best part of 10 years ago, they already had electric cars. And they were also using those electric cars when the sun wasn't shining very much. They were using those electric cars to power the office. It's known as vehicle to grid. And so you're actually feeding, people say, we've got to have all these electric cars and you're going to have to put the energy into them. They can also be storage for the grid when you need it.
Thank you very much, Nick, for your call. James in Battersea says, Natalie is the first politician you've had on the show who actually answers questions, even if the answer is difficult or controversial. I'm not a Green voter, but I appreciate the straight talking. Kate says, I listen to your show all the time and you have lots of politicians on air who waffle and avoid questions. This is the first time recently that I've been impressed by a politician and you're just dissing her. How... Do you feel that I've dissed you, Natalie? I mean, I may disagree from time to time. I may play devil's advocate from time to time. That's kind of the role of an interviewer. Anyway, Kate finishes off, you're not reading the room that is our country. Well, if that is the case, then I look forward to a Green overwhelming majority in Parliament at the next election, Kate. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:46.
LBC, this morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
The ongoing row about the Garrick Club. Now, The Guardian managed to get hold of the list of members, and it was a roll call of the establishment. Senior judges, senior politicians, senior journalists too. To Dame Andrea Leadsom, Conservative MP. Were you to be offered the opportunity, would you join the Garrick Club?
I think it's been open for about 200 years.
Yes.
And I think it's never accepted women.
Hasn't.
And I think it's a bit extraordinary that the head of the civil service has only just discovered that.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7.
With EDF, helping to cut carbon and cost for everyone.
LBC.
We have former Green Party lead, Natalie Bennett joining us. It wasn't you that made me cough, it's just a thing. Her book is called Change Everything, How we can rethink, repair and rebuild society. This texter says, it's so interesting to listen to Natalie. We rarely get to hear the Green Party's voice, and she's so informative and actually talks intelligently, unlike Tory politicians. She may well be gathering many more votes for the Greens from this show, and I'm going to read her book now. Sybil in Sutton says, please can Natalie stick to some realistic debate? Yes, we need to change in terms of tackling climate change, but this cannot happen overnight. She mentioned that people can install solar panels overnight onto their homes. Has she forgotten that these things cost money?
No, absolutely. And one of the things that, I'm here perhaps talking about the book rather than Green Party policies, but one of the things we want to see is massive government support. And indeed, I was just talking to people yesterday about the whole issue of we need to get home insulation, so people need less energy in the first place, as we were on before. And we need to look at street by street, seeing programs that can actually go through and give people warm, comfortable, affordable heat homes and cut their bills. And that would include putting solar panels. And, why is it we are still building houses in 2024 that haven't got solar panels on their roof when they're new? We should have been doing that a decade ago. We've had a lost decade of all of those people who've now got far more expensive homes to run because they haven't got solar panels on the roof.
I think the home insulation thing is quite an interesting one. And I think Labour were, in the last election, promising, I can't remember what the details were, but it was a massive rollout of home insulation. But then it was pointed out to them that this had happened in Australia and it had proved to be a complete disaster because there was this huge scheme. There weren't enough people to implement it, and those that were implementing it weren't trained properly. And there were like people dying because they didn't know how to do it.
Well, I mean, green skills is a huge problem. It's one of the reasons why I'm on the All-Party Parliamentary Group on apprenticeships, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on T-levels. I think we've got an enormous shortage of skills. I'm a builder's daughter, and the lack of those practical skills comes back to what we were talking about education, the education that needs far more focus on that kind of practical learning and knowledge to start people off. But you've got to probably 12 years ago, I went to Insulation UK, the industry's annual gathering, and they were basically seeing people were closing down their businesses because after the Labour government went in 2010, there was no government money anymore and there was no work. And the businesses all closed down. We've been through a boom and bust cycle of those kind of policies again and again. We need a long, steady, decades-long plan that people can then set up small independent businesses all around the country. I mean, one of the great things about insulation is that every community in the land needs them. This is an enormous opportunity for small independent businesses up and down the land to work in their local community, deliver for their local community, develop the skills. But they need the policy certainty, the long-term policy, which we've just not had for decades in the UK.
And do you think we're going to get it from Labour?
No, I'm afraid not. I mean, as you mentioned, the 28 billion green investment figure, that was really firm until there was some opposition, and then it wasn't. And that's really disturbing in its own terms, in terms of that area of green. But it's more disturbing in general in terms of we need governments that have principles, that have plans, that have policies that are going to stick for the long term. And we haven't seen it from the Tories. I mean, they haven't even been able to stick to prime ministers. But
cheap shot there, but true.
But we need that long term kind of planning, and we're not getting it.
Ben is a new caller in Ealing. Hello, Ben.
Hello there.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
I would like to. I'm naturally very sympathetic to the Greens and really great listening to Natalie talking this evening. My question is about membership of NATO and what the policy is, what her view is on that, and what the Green Party policy is, and if the two are in sync. Personally speaking, for me, it's a bit of a red line. I'd like to vote Green, but with the Ukraine war, I've had Ukrainians staying in my house. I don't think it would be right to pull out of NATO or withdraw support for NATO. I think we need defence. The world is not an ideal place. I'd just like to put that question to Natalie.
So let's split that into two, because I don't know whether your position on NATO is the same as the Green Party's, but traditionally the Green Party has been very NATO sceptic, to put it kindly.
Well, But my position and the Green Party's are the same. And we've recently actually entirely rewritten our policy. Our policy dated back 2 or 3 decades. And we acknowledge, as you rightly say, Ben, in terms of the world we live in now, we accept NATO membership. We would really like to see some things like, for example, a no first use nuclear policy within NATO. We'd like to see NATO operating slightly differently to what it does now. But in the current situation, we're not opposed to membership of NATO, and that's our position. And, I think if you look at the situation in Ukraine, I myself was in Kyiv about 18 months ago, and I went there with the European Green Party. And the German Greens in particular have been absolutely at forefront. The Ukrainians have come under attack. The President Putin defied international law, tried to take over a neighbouring country. The responsibility is for other countries to help that country defend itself, and that's what the German Greens have done and what we've very much stood up for.
Well, the German Greens have been very trenchant on it, haven't they? Ben, are you suitably reassured?
I am reassured. I hadn't realised that change had happened. It's good to hear it has. Unfortunately, I think the coming years are going to see a requirement for greater defence spending. That's obvious now, really. We can't just sort of rely on America to protect us. Would you go further, Natalie, and say that, you would support that, or you would agree that probably we do need to spend a bit more on defence?
Well, I think we have to look at this, and the government does this itself, Ben, with there's the integrated review, which looks at defence, that looks at diplomacy, that looks at overseas official development assistance. So we really have to look at how we make a more secure, stable world. If I can do a little advert for the book, if you happen to be able to lay hands on a copy, the last 2 chapters very much discuss these issues. We can't afford to just say we're going to have a new Cold War. Foreign Policy, the Defence Journal, produced an article saying, what does the next Cold War look like? When you look at the state of our natural world, the state of the world we're living in, we've got to try and work our way forward to something different. Yes, we need defence, we need defence infrastructure, but we need to be realistic about how we can get the world together.
Well, all these extra votes you're racking up, I think we should be invoicing you for this hour somehow, but there we are. Now, I'm afraid this has got to be a quick answer because we are running out of time. Peter says, do you believe in proportional representation? I do, and wish the Conservatives would change the voting system quickly so I can vote for Reform UK.
Well, I think everyone should be able to vote for what they want and get it, which is what you would have under a proportional system. If a party gets 10% of the votes, they get 10% of the seats. That's essential for a democracy. And safe seats where people's vote is not counted for generations are an absolute disaster for democracy. Yes, we need a modern, functional, democratic constitution. We haven't got one now.
But they would change if enough people voted for them to change.
You can get have a 4-way split seat, and someone wins the seat with 26% of the vote. People can change their vote in all directions, so it doesn't count.
At the next election, a different party might win with 27% of the vote. That doesn't invalidate the system.
Well, I think if you don't have a parliament that reflects the views of the people, which we don't have anything like now, the Tories got 44% of the vote in 2019 and 100% of the power in the Commons. That's not a democracy.
Doesn't feel like that, does it?
Well, if they don't know what to do with the power and can't work out which direction they're facing today, that's not a result of the voting system.
Brian says, just flipped my vote to Green. I wish we could sort of actually do a poll of the number of people who switched their vote as a result of listening to an hour of Natalie Bennett. And if you've enjoyed this hour, you can listen to another hour because she's on my All Talk podcast this week. We talked about a lot of different things that we haven't talked about in this hour. So do download that on Global Player. And also buy Natalie's book. It's called Change Everything. It's available now. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thanks, Ian.
Now, coming up in the next hour, we are going to... In fact, Natalie, are you a member of an all-women's club?
No.
Would you like to be a member of one?
I've been on a few all-women sports teams over the years. I don't know if you count that as a club.
A little bit. But there's been a big controversy this week about the Garrick Club in London, which is only about 500 yards from this studio, which is an all-male club. And the head of the civil service and the head of MI6 have been forced to quit the club because it doesn't allow women members. Now, I have some rather conflicting views on this, which I'll explain in just a minute. But I wonder whether you think that it's right to have all male clubs in 2024.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play